So now that we have our independent and dependent variable, we can actually go ahead and start graphing and interpreting. So in order to graph, we need scales. We need an x-axis and a y-axis. There's a couple of questions you want to think about in order to make your x-axis and y-axis. First, what's the biggest x I might reasonably want to graph? Second, what's the biggest y I might have to graph? Okay? So we can make some assumptions here. Don't ever be afraid to make assumptions if the problem calls for it. So in this problem, we need to kind of assume that he's a used car salesman and that there's a reasonable demand for cars. Could have assumed other things, but this makes sense. We're not asked to get a perfect graph. We're just asked to get a graph that makes sense, right? And we don't know how many cars he sells, so we're just going to try to make a reasonable one. So let's assume if he's a used car salesman, cars are roughly 5,000 each. Let's also assume that there's enough demand for him to sell 2 cars each week, which would mean he sells 8 cars per month because there's 4 weeks in a month. So 5,000 times 8 gets us 40,000 total cars sold, or total cost of all cars sold. And we're going to round that to 50,000 to make our lives easier. Now, to get the y, we know if the highest we're going up for x, we need to plug that in to find out what y would be. So we plug in x, 50,000, we get 2,700, and we round that up to 3,000 to make our lives easier. So let's talk a little bit about scaling, right? If I know this has to go up to 50,000, I'm going to think about what my intervals need to be. If I made this interval 1, no way am I going to have enough as I go across, right? If I made this interval 10,000, I'm only going to get to here, and that's going to be too squished, right? So somewhere between 1 and 10,000 makes sense. Let's try to think of something that is reasonable. I'm going to eyeball it and think that, like, around here, 10,000, right? Somewhere around there. And now I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 10,000 divided by 5. Each of these is 2,000. That's good. I want each of my tick marks to be a nice round number. Okay. And if I do 10,000, 20,000, 30, 40, 50, I'll have enough space. Same thing on the y, right? If I know I need to get up to 3,000, I'm going to eyeball it and try to figure out a reasonable thing for each interval to be, which in this case is 200. 200, 400, 400, 600, 800, 1,000. And that gets me up to enough space to get to 3,000. Right? Remember, we want to label these. This is salary in dollars. This is all car money. We want to do something more formal than that, but for time purposes, that's what we'll have. Okay? And then, of course, we know one point is 50,000, 3,000 from over here. We know that another point is 0, 1,200. Because if he doesn't sell anything, he makes that 1,200 base. And if you want to, you could plug in 10,000 and get 1,500 to make sure you have a nice smooth line.